Hi guys, and welcome back to another Genshin Impact weapon comparison. So I already reviewed the three 5-star claymore in the game right now, so the Unforged, the Gravestone, and of course the Skyward Pride. So we're gonna take a look at the damage output that this weapon can do in an hypothetical situation as always. In this case, we have a character with 100 attack, at 0.7 attack speed, he has no artifact or buff of any kind, he only have pretty much the stats that he gained from the weapons alone. The weapons, of course, level 19, because it's much easier to understand damage output. The skill percent is 1. If you're interested in what is the skill percent, in the damage calculation formula, it's you to attack that multiply on any type of damage that percent bonus that you have, that multiply the skill percent. Pretty much, if you go in your talents, and you see your, for example, ultimate burst or elemental ability, you see that they don't actually have a damage output, they have a percent. Pretty much that percent is this one. I just make it that it's 1 to make the math easier. But if you can easily change it with the skill you prefer. And every character has a 5% crit rate and a 15% crit damage as base stats. But I usually use this when we have a critical weapon with crit rate. In this case we don't, so we will never use this into the comparison. And the refine level 1, because it's just easier. These are especially because these are 5-star weapon, but pretty much if you have a weapon a different refine, you just need to change a number here and there. It's not super hard, but if you have problem, you can actually write that in the comment and I could do the math for you. Now, we will start very fast with the Unforged. This weapon is pretty interesting. It's the one that came with the new series. It has a 608 attack and it has a 49.6% attack secondary stats, plus a 20% that you gain from the passive. In fact, every time you attack an enemy, you gain a 4% attack boost that can stack up to 5 times. This means that in 5 attacks, you can gain a 20%, and 49.6 plus 20% is 69.6. This means that we will have an attack multiplier of 1.69 and 6. Pretty much, I use this because it's very easy to stack the Unforged. You just need the 5 attacks, and you need to wait 1.5 seconds because from a stack to another there is a 0.3 second of waiting, but it's not really, it's very fast to activate this passive. You will probably have it activated 99.9% of the time. So this is pretty much the total attack that you will pretty much often have with this weapon on. Now, it's 1200 point something, and it's actually pretty decent because if we are under a shield, we gain 20%, we gain a 100% boost to your passive. So the 100% of 20, it's under 20. This means that this goes up to a 1.8 something. That translates to a 1342 total attack. Keep in mind that this weapon has no damage percent in its passive or secondary stats. This means that because we have a skill percent of 1, the total attack of the weapon is actually even the damage that we will do. So this is actually the damage that we do in this case. Now, that's actually very important, because if we would have, for example, a damage multiplier, let's go that we have a 15% physical damage bonus, the damage that we will do would go up to nearly 2000 or 2000 and something. And that's actually very strong, and that's actually why you need damage percent, usually in form of elemental if you need it, or physical if you are a physical attacker. It's actually very important to improve your damage. And of course a 20% more shield, that it's not really useful for damage, but it's still a thing for utility. If you need to have a stronger shield, it's okay, it's always nice. The Wolf Gravestone is the other claymore in the game right now. It's considered by many one of the best, and we're gonna see why. Now, the total attack of the weapon is actually the same as the Unforged, because it has the same attack, the same secondary stats, it's a 49.6, even the Wolf Gravestone, and it has a 20%, sorry, it has a 20% attack boost. The only difference is that the Unforged need to stack, so they need a high stack, while this weapon pretty much have the 20% always on. So the damage is actually the same. But we have a passive that when we hit an enemy, and the enemies have less than 50% of the HP, we have a 14% attack boost for all your party members. That's actually very strong, because it means that this goes up pretty much to a 2 multiplier, so it's actually very, very strong, and the damage in fact is 1583. Pretty much it's like 100 more than the Unforged. The only problem is that you need, of course, while the Unforged need just a shield, you need to hit an enemy with less than 30% HP. So it's a bit to this. You probably have this against a boss in the very late of the fight. Against normal enemies, it's just a bit easier to do, especially against group of enemies, because you just hit a weak enemy, you activate this, and you start destroying all the other enemies around you. And of course, the 14% attack boost is actually for all your party member, so this is actually very strong. The main difference is that this weapon has, of course, no damage multiplier, so the total attack is the damage. But one of the main differences is that the Unforged actually has no cooldown on the passive. This means that when you have a shield, you will always have this activated, while for this, you need to wait 13 seconds and it only lasts for 12 seconds. I don't own the weapon, so I don't know if it's 12 plus 13, and so it's a 40 pretty much, it's a full 13 seconds, or it's the cooldown start when you activate the passive. Because if the cooldown start when you activate the passive, it's pretty much 13, but you need to minus the 12, so it's only an 18-second cooldown. I don't own the weapon, so I can test this. If it's if it's a full 13 seconds, it's a bit meh. But if it's only an 18-second, it's a very strong weapon, because as you can see, it out damage the Unforged, and of course because it's for all your party member, pretty much you can actually just use this, switch to other main DPS and destroy the enemies. That's really very strong. And the last one is the Skyward Pride. This weapon has only a 674 attack, and it has no attack multiplier, so the total attack is 774, and it only has a 8% damage bonus. And I think that it's all type of damage, so at least that's a bit decent, but with only an 8%, this goes up to an 835 damage. So you can easily see that this is very low. It's 400 less than this, and pretty much 500 less than this, and so there is a big difference in damage. But keep in mind that this has no attack percent multiplier, and of course only an 8%, because the secondary stats, it's energy recharge. But energy recharge is very useful, because the second part of the passive say that when you use an elemental burst, your normal and charged attacks will do 8 Vagon Blade. Or you will do 8 Vagon Blade, or if you hit an enemy less than 8 times, pretty much it only lasts 12 seconds. Now, what are Vagon Blade? Pretty much, when you hit an enemy, you will do an additional damage, because the weapon will release this wind blade from it. This thing only does 80% of your attack, that's actually very huge, and 80% of 774, because that's your attack, it's 690. Now, this means that your total attack, with your normal attack plus the passive, will go up to 1455. So this is actually very strong, because we actually we surpassed the Unforged, and we pretty much are like 13 damage less than the Wolf Gravestone with the passive on. So that's actually a big difference. And you need to keep in mind that we have an attack percent multiplier, because if we would have an attack percent multiplier, this attack would increase. So with the attack increase, the damage will increase, and even the passive damage, because a bigger attack means that you have a bigger... so this means that, for example, even the passive, of course, the Vagon Blade gets stronger, because it's 80% of your attack. And the interesting part is that not only you need attack percent, but I think that even a crit build would be decent, because Vagon Blade can actually crit. This means that you can apply 80% of your attack, and if you crit, you can multiply it for 1.5 times the damage. So that's actually very strong, and that's why I think that the Skyward Pride is actually not a bad claymore. I think that's actually very, very strong, and I think that it can easily be good as the Unforged and the Gravestone. The only problem is that, of course, you need the elemental burst, and we are gonna see why that's a problem. Because this weapon has no cooldown. Pretty much the cooldown of the passive is the cooldown of your ultimate ability. Because there are characters that have different cooldowns on their ultimate ability, and of course there are characters that have, for example, even different cost of energy. Like, for example, Diluc should have a 12-second cooldown on its ultimate, and it only costs for 14 energy. This means that it's actually pretty easy to use the Skyward Pride. Why? Because with a 12-second cooldown, it's pretty low, and for 40 energy, it's pretty easy to get, especially thanks to the energy recharge. While, for example, Beidou has a 20-second cooldown, so it's 8 seconds more, that's very huge, with an 18 energy cost. So you can see that the Skyward Pride could easily be better on Diluc than, for example, Beidou, simply because you can't activate this passive for pretty much 20 seconds, and that's very bad. Even more, because if you are unlucky and you get less energy in 10-20 seconds, you probably need to waste even more time, and that's bad. So the Skyward Pride, it's a strong weapon, but the problem is that it can be used on every character, because different characters have different energy cost and different cooldown on their ultimate burst. Usually, less cooldown, it's better, bigger cooldown, it's bad. That's pretty easy. Now, I just wanted to see the damage output that this weapon could do in 8 attacks, simply because the Skyward Pride Vacuum Blade lasts only for 8 attacks when using a Metal Burst, so just to see the max damage output. The Unforged, with the passive, at max stack but with no shield, it's a 9606. With the shield, it's 10,738, and that's actually a big difference, like 1,100 more. So it's pretty much like you did, it's like with a shield on, it's like you did 9 attacks instead of 8. So the difference is actually very strong. Especially if you have, for example, any other damage multiplier activated, this will probably increase even more. The Gravestone has, of course, the same damage because this is with no passive, and they have the same attack. With the passive on, this is actually a bit stronger than the Unforged, but that's pretty easy to spot. But you need to understand that while you do this every time you are under a shield, and with, of course, the passive at max stack, this can only be activated when an enemy is less than 30% HP. And against boss, this is pretty meh. And why? Because when a boss, when he has less than 50% of his HP, is already dead. Like you can just beat him harder, but that's not really a big difference because he was already dead. While with Unforged, you can pretty much do a decent damage even when he's a full HP. This weapon is pretty good, I think, in Abyss, when you have different group of enemy, like you have 20 and more enemies. This means that these actually will activate it even for the other, even if they are full HP, because you killed one and you gain a buff. And so that's I think the Wolf Gravestone is pretty good for domain, for group activity where there are multiple enemies. Because for now, I considered only 3 bosses in the game, that pretty much are Divalin, Child, and the Wolf, that I can't remember the name. And the problem with all these 3 bosses is that they don't actually spawn any little monster. Like in most games, when you fight boss, sometimes they spawn a little monster that you just kill and they are annoying. And that little monster is actually very important in gameplay wise, because they actually are useful, for example, for activating this passive. Because if a little mob spawn, you kill it, he has less than 30% HP, you activated the Wolf Gravestone passive and you could hit the boss with this damage, even if it's like full HP. Or you can activate it, for example, artifact set or other weapons that require you to kill an enemy, or I don't know, to have an enemy on less than that HP. While against boss that just are them and you can't actually activate most of this passive. So that's why I think that this game actually require Infused boss would actually be nice if they actually spawn mobs with them. That would really help. Like the Cryo Regisvine of the event actually spawned a little slime, and that slime actually could help you, because you kill the slime and you get the Wolf Gravestone passive and you hit the Cryo Regisvine with a lot of damage. That's pretty much it. But let's talk about the Skyward Pride. Why is it Zeta? Let's remove this. Now, the Skyward Pride damage without the passive, it's very low. It's nearly pretty much 3,000 less damage, and that's actually a lot. That's a lot. It's like the Skyward Pride did more. It's a big difference. Like 3,000, it's a lot. But with the passive on, the damage is actually very good because it surpasses the Unforged, and it's only 200 less than the Wolf Gravestone. But the problem, of course, is that while, as I said always, with Unforged you just need a shield, with the Skyward Pride you need to use your ultimate burst, so it depends on the cooldown of the ultimate burst and of much energy you can actually gain. And with the Wolf Gravestone, the problem of the passive is that the enemy need to be with less than 30% HP. From this, I actually believe that all these 3 claymores are good. They are all 3 very, very good weapons. I think that maybe the worst one could be the Skyward Pride, simply because the passive, even if it's very strong, it requires you to have specific character, like you can give this weapon to character with low cooldown, and that's bad because it pretty much make you dislock the weapon for a lot of character, like they do. With a 20-second cooldown, I think that it's too much. While on low cooldown this weapon could be good, and with a nice artifact set, the damage of the passive of the Vacuum Blade can actually be very, very strong. But the problem is that, of course, this cannot be used on every character. The Wolf Gravestone, instead, it's very generic, you can use this on every character. The only problem, as I said, is that the passive is very strong, but against boss enemy it's not super useful right now, because boss are pretty much a 1v1, while against group of enemies, or for example, Abyss, this weapon is actually very good. And Unforged is pretty much good on every occasion, but the only problem is that because you need a shield, this means that you need to have a Geo or a shield creating character in your party. Now there is Noelle and Pyro Girl with the guitar that actually can create a shield and they're claymore user, so that's a bit easier, but not a lot of people use Noelle, and usually on Noelle people like defense, simply because she has ability that scale with defense. So the Unforged could be decent, but maybe they're a better weapon. And the Pyro Girl can actually use the Unforged no problems. You can even use this on any other character, but you need to have a shield with them, or you will lose a lot of damage. But that's all for the video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I could actually help you decide on what claymore you wanted to use on your character. And let me know in the comments what you think about this weapon and what build maybe you have with them. And see ya on the next video.